what really drives societies? Why do we see this constant push towards peace, towards building something better, but then also these powerful forces that seem determined to pull everything apart?
It's a huge question, and one that feels very present right now.
Absolutely. So welcome, everyone. In this deep dive, we're really going to unpack some materials you shared with us specifically, a document that looks at these, well, opposing worldviews. Want to get to the heart of it.
Exactly. We're not just skimming the surface. The goal is to dissect the core beliefs, the fundamental principles that steer societies either towards peace or, unfortunately, towards conflict.
Yeah, we want the key insights, the things that make you go, aha.
Right. Avoiding the jargon, focusing on those crucial takeaways.
So our mission today, understand the values behind peace, love, economic development, and then understand what drives the rejection of those ideals. Okay, let's get started.
All right. So the source material begins by asking, well, what must be true for a society that consistently aims for peace, love, and progress? The idea is this doesn't happen by accident. There are underlying principles.
Makes sense. And the first one identified is the value of human dignity and life. It's this core belief that, violence, exploitation, they're just fundamentally wrong because every single person has inherent worth.
It's intrinsic, not something you have to earn. It's the foundation.
Right. And if you start there, valuing everyone.
Then the next logical step, the document suggests, is a commitment to harmony and cooperation.
So not just avoiding fights, but actively choosing dialogue.
Exactly. Seeking mutual understanding, building bridges, rather than just trying to dominate. It's about finding ways to connect.
And this isn't just about solving today's problems, is it? There's a sense of looking ahead.
Definitely. That brings us to long-term thinking and sustainability. If you're genuinely pursuing peace and development, it implies you're thinking about inclusive progress.
Like caring about future generations.
Precisely. Responsibility for the future. Things like investing in education, healthcare. They aren't quick fixes, but they build a foundation for lasting well-being.
Okay. And underpinning this, justice.
Absolutely crucial. A commitment to justice and equity. The source is quite clear. Peace without fairness feels hollow. Love can't really thrive where there's systemic injustice.
So it means actively protecting rights, especially for those pushed to the margins.
Yes, and working to reduce those big gaps, the inequalities.
Then there's this idea of interconnectedness and community.
Right, the understanding that we're all linked. My well-being depends on yours, and yours on mine, extending outwards.
Out of a global village idea.
In a way, yes. It fosters looking at collective well-being, shared prosperity, maybe even global solidarity. We're in it together.
It's interesting how the document connects this to moral or spiritual foundations.
It does. It points out that these drives often stem from ethical or religious convictions. Love thy neighbor in Christianity.
Islamic ideas of compassion, Buddhist nonviolence.
Indigenous views on harmony. Even without formal religion, often there's this underlying belief in a shared morality, a right way to relate to each other.
And finally, there's this thread of optimism and belief in human potential.
Yeah, the idea that progress is possible without violence, that we can grow, cooperate, build something better. It's a fundamental faith in our capacity for compassion and improvement.
So putting it all together,
Yeah.
Those pursuing peace seem to value dignity, justice, the long view, connection, often a moral purpose.
Exactly. They tend to reject fear as the primary motivator and embrace cooperation instead.
Okay, that paints a clear picture of one worldview. But what about the opposite? What can we infer when societies seem to consistently reject peace, love, progress?
Right. The document then pivots to explore the inferences we can draw there. It suggests a different set of underlying drivers are likely at play.
And the first one is kind of the opposite of cooperation.
Pretty much. The embrace of fear, control, or dominance. Instead of finding common ground, the focus is on power, on coercion. Conflict isn't a problem to solve, it's a tool.
Often linked to a scarcity mindset, like there's not enough to go around, so we have to fight for our share.
Exactly. A belief that survival demands dominance.
And if you're focused on control, maybe you start seeing people differently.
That leads to the next point. A potential devaluation of human life or dignity. When violence or hatred becomes normalized, it suggests a lowered regard for people, especially outsiders.
Seeing them as instruments or threats.
Rather than fellow humans worthy of respect.
There's also a kind of negativity mentioned.
Yes, cynicism or pessimism about human nature. This is the view that peace and love are, frankly, naive. that the world is just a brutal competition and trusting others is foolish.
That sounds like it could come from some dark places. Trauma, maybe?
It could. Or just a deeply ingrained negative worldview that shuts down hope.
And if you're cynical about people, maybe you don't care much about fairness either.
Well, that connects to the disregard for equity or justice. Hindering progress for all often suggests a desire to keep things unequal, to protect privilege for a certain group.
Resisting anything that might level the playing field.
Precisely. Then there's the danger of ideological rigidity or tribalism.
Where loyalty to your group, your idea, your nation becomes more important than, well, shared humanity.
Exactly. That us versus them thinking. It can be used to justify almost anything against the other. Violence, deprivation, you name it.
We also see short-term thinking or destructive impulses.
Right. Prioritizing immediate gain for yourself or your group, even if it harms others down the line, not thinking about the long-term consequences.
Just grab what you can now.
Sort of. And finally, the document touches on something deeper. Emotional or psychological wounds.
How does that fit in?
It suggests that sometimes rejecting positive values like trust or compassion might stem from unresolved trauma, deep disillusionment, maybe never having experienced care oneself.
So like a defense mechanism almost.
Yeah.
So, as you said, it doesn't excuse harmful actions.
Right. It adds a layer of understanding.
Okay, so summarizing this opposing view, it seems rooted in fear, power, division, short-term thinking, maybe fueled by cynicism or even past wounds.
That's a good summary. And the document then takes this into a spiritual dimension, which is quite compelling.
How so?
It explores how different spiritual traditions often frame these opposing forces. What's striking is the similarity in how they're described as being against life, against unity, against the spirit itself.
Okay, let's unpack that, starting with Christianity.
The document points to Satan, the adversary, as a force promoting division, lies, violence, pride, greed. It also mentions the concept of principalities and powers.
Suggesting forces that can influence systems, institutions.
Exactly, leading to systemic oppression.
And in Islam.
There's Shaitan, or Iblis, who represents arrogance and actively tries to mislead humanity away from peace, salam, mercy, rahmah, and justice. So resisting exploitation becomes a spiritual duty.
What about Buddhism?
We encounter Mara. Mara embodies ego, fear, desire, delusion, everything that keeps us trapped in suffering. In samsara, clinging to power, hatred, greed. These are seen as spiritual blindness, the opposite of compassion, or karun.
And in Hinduism?
The document mentions the asuras, who often represent chaos, excessive desire, and spiritual ignorance, avidya. They oppose the devas and the path of dharma, which emphasizes righteous living and peaceful coexistence.
It's interesting how indigenous traditions are framed, not always as a specific evil figure. Right?
Often, no. It's more about disrupting balance with the land, spirits, community. Disrespect, greed, these violate the sacred order.
And finally, New Thought and mystical traditions.
They often see opposition as error thinking, the ego clinging to separation, fear, control, instead of recognizing the divine as unity, abundance, love. It's seen as an illusion, a deviation.
Wow. So across the board, there's this common idea that opposing peace and love is, well, opposing life itself, promoting division and fear.
That seems to be the core insight. And this leads to the next step. How these underlying principles can harden into actual systems, into ideologies.
You mean when these negative drivers become embedded in how a society runs?
Exactly. The document argues that when fear, power-seeking, division, and short-termism become systemic, they create ideologies with some really disturbing traits.
Like what?
Well, first, control becomes the ultimate goal. Not responsibility, but power for its own sake. Institutions, leaders demanding absolute obedience, regardless of truth or ethics.
And truth itself gets twisted.
Yes, truth becomes suppressed or manipulated. Language becomes propaganda, history gets rewritten, dissent is crushed. Cynicism and apathy can take root.
And individuals, how are they viewed?
Often, individuals become mere tools, instruments to achieve some goal rather than beings valued in themselves. Exploitation becomes normal. Hierarchies based on identity, race, religion, whatever, are reinforced by denying the humanity of others.
And conflict. Is it seen as inevitable?
Frequently, yes. Ongoing conflict is presented as necessary, even natural, for security, for progress. Peace looks suspicious. Compassion looks weak. Fear holds it all together.
It sounds bleak. Spiritually, how does the document describe this?
It paints it as a kind of anti-spirit state. Maybe like an earthly hell in Christian terms, profound separation from purpose, from each other, from oneself.
Or deep suffering in Buddhist terms?
Driven by delusion, yes. Or mystically, the total illusion of separateness from love and unity.
And history gives us plenty of examples, unfortunately.
It does. The document mentions totalitarian regimes, Nazi Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, colonial empires built on exploitation, militant theocracies, even modern forms like oppressive technocracies or oligarchies.
The consequences sound devastating. Collective trauma.
Fear, mistrust passed down through generations, a kind of spiritual numbness where people lose hope, lose empathy.
Losing the ability to even imagine something better.
Sadly, yes. A world where fear seems to trump love, control trumps connection. And this, the document argues, reaches its absolute peak, its ultimate manifestation.
Nuclear weapons.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The argument is that developing and holding onto technologies designed for utter annihilation is the ultimate expression of that worldview based on fear, power, division, and short-term thinking.
It's a powerful symbol and a terrifying reality.
The document lays out 5 key reasons why. First, fear is the strategy. Mutually assured destruction, MAD.
The idea that the only thing stopping catastrophe is the certainty of mutual annihilation.
Exactly. It's not based on trust. It assumes the worst and relies entirely on the threat of obliteration. It's like managing the apocalypse.
Chilling. And the power involved.
That's the second point. Ultimate power as a kind of secular godhood. The ability to wipe out life on Earth is the ultimate form of power, achieved through destruction. It confers immense influence based purely on lethal capability.
And these weapons create divisions.
Absolutely. Point 3. Division becomes institutionalized. A hierarchy of nuclear haves and have-nots, breeding fear, mistrust, secrecy, surveillance.
It seems incredibly focused on the short term, too.
That's point 4. Short-term security prioritized over immense long-term risk. The perceived immediate gain of power or deterrence outweighs a potential extinction of life itself. It's the ultimate gamble with the future.
And finally, it's seen as a reflection of something deeper.
Point 5. The technological mirror of spiritual decay. These weapons aren't just metal and wires. They're physical manifestations of our inner fear, pride, disconnection.
And how do different spiritual traditions view this?
Starkly, Christianity might see echoes of those principalities and powers, an antichrist spirit willing to destroy life.
Buddhism.
The ultimate act of delusion and hatred leading to unimaginable suffering.
Indigenous views.
A profound violation of the sacred balance between humanity and the earth.
So the document calls them a spiritual wound made flesh.
Yes. Embodying that anti-life, anti-spirit ideology. Presenting us with a choice. Self-destruction. Or finding a new path based on peace.
To ground this, the document lists the 9 known nuclear-armed states.
Right. The U.S., Russia, China, France, the U.K., Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. It also notes countries like South Africa and Ukraine that gave them up.
And it mentions the key players involve scientists like Oppenheimer, military-industrial complexes, political leaders, institutions like the IAEA working on non-proliferation.
The key takeaway being that these 9 nations hold immense power and responsibility, operating within a global system largely based on deterrence through fear.
Now, the document introduces a framework to think about this. A Likert scale of spiritual decay and destruction related to nuclear arms.
Yes, it's a conceptual tool. 5 levels to gauge how national policies seem to align with those destructive ideologies. Not judging, but examining tendencies.
Okay, what's level 1?
Exemplars of peace and unity. Nations actively pushing for disarmament. Costa Rica, having abolished its military. New Zealand, strongly nuclear-free. Bhutan, prioritizing happiness over might.
Level 2.
Advocates for non-proliferation. Countries without nukes that support treaties and peace. Germany, Japan, Canada are examples.
Level 3 is ambiguous stance.
Yes. Nations without their own nukes but involved in nuclear alliances or hosting weapons. Think Turkey, Netherlands, Italy within NATO.
Level 4.
Nuclear-armed states with defensive postures. Those with nukes but claiming they're purely defensive, often with a no-first-use policy. China and India are placed here.
Level 5.
Nuclear-armed states with ambiguous or aggressive postures. Nations with large arsenals actively modernizing and policies that don't rule out first use or more aggressive scenarios. Russia, the U.S., North Korea are examples given.
And again, this is presented as a way to reflect ethically and spiritually on these choices.
Exactly. And building on that, there's a final framework, a map of principle and peace.
Which uses a kind of moral spectrum.
Yes, one end aligned with God, peace, love, justice, unity. The other with the devil, fear, domination, destruction. It evaluates national behaviors and systems, not people.
So level 1 on this map closest to divine principles.
Again, Costa Rica, New Zealand, Bhutan, for their consistent renunciation of violence.
Level 2, strong moral foundations but compromised by alliances.
Canada, Japan, Germany, Norway, advocating peace but within nuclear alliances.
Level 3, ambiguity and internal conflict.
UK, France, India, democracies but nuclear armed with global military roles. Also South Korea, Italy, Turkey aligned with nuclear powers.
Level 4, rationalized power and deterrence.
The US and Russia, with massive arsenals justified by deterrence doctrines.
And level 5, closest to that destructive alignment.
North Korea, Israel, given its policy ambiguity and regional stance, and Pakistan. Policies seen as reflecting fear, dominance, or extremism regarding nuclear weapons.
The document sums this up as a moral mirror, showing alignment with either love or fear.
Echoing, by their fruits you'll know them. Actions revealing underlying principles.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, we've journeyed through these core principles driving towards peace and the opposing forces pushing towards conflict.
We've looked at how different spiritual traditions interpret these forces and how they can manifest systemically, culminating in the nuclear age.
Understanding these underlying dynamics, as laid out in the source, really does give you a different lens for viewing the world, doesn't it?
It offers a framework, absolutely.
And it really leaves you, the listener, with a potent question to ponder. Where do you see these dynamics playing out? Not just globally, but maybe closer to home, in your own life, your community.
What does it actually mean day to day to choose connection over fear, peace over conflict?
Maybe thinking about our individual role in shifting towards that more life-affirming way of being. Perhaps that's the most important takeaway of all.